That former President Donald Trump has now been indicted by a grand jury here in Manhattan. All of this, of course, in connection to hush money payments paid to adult film actress Stormy Daniels in the weeks just before the 2016 election. The indictment is sealed. It could be several days before we know exactly what the charges are. The former president speaking with our reporter just moments ago, saying they are trying to impact an election. What else he said in just a moment here. This, of course, is unprecedented. Donald Trump is the first president, current or former, ever to face criminal charges. A key witness in this indictment, his former attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen. Donald Trump, of course, is running for president again, and he is ahead in the Republican polls, and he vows to press on as he faces these criminal charges and several other investigations as well. The special counsel investigating January 6th and the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. And in Georgia, the investigation into pressure to find the votes in a state Joe Biden narrowly won. But tonight, all eyes on this Manhattan grand jury and their indictment of a former president. The former president has been informed tonight, and ABC senior investigative correspondent Aaron Katersky leading us off outside the courthouse right here in Manhattan.
Tonight, a Manhattan grand jury voting to indict Donald Trump, making him the first president in American history to be charged with a crime. The investigation, which has been going on for years, involves a $130,000 hush money payment to porn actress Stormy Daniels in the closing weeks of the 2016 campaign, a payment Trump initially said he knew nothing about. But the former president's one-time fixer and lawyer, Michael Cohen, says he made the payment to Daniels at Trump's direction to silence her before the election. Trump's legal team now acknowledges the payment, but says Trump was trying to protect his family, not his campaign. Trump says he didn't have an affair with Daniels and that he didn't do anything wrong.
From the beginning, it's been one witch hunt and phony investigation after another.
In recent weeks, the former president stepped up his attacks on Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, warning of death and destruction if he's indicted and urging his supporters to protest. The NYPD is stepping up security around the court in Lower Manhattan, putting down barricades, all in preparation for this very moment.
Aaron Katersky, who was on the air with me late this afternoon as all of this was unfolding, back with us live now from Lower Manhattan. And Aaron, the grand jury, of course, has handed up this indictment. We don't know the charges at this point, but what's next for the former president? What can the American people watching us tonight expect to witness unfold in the coming days here?
That indictment remains sealed, David, until Trump appears here at court for arraignment. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office and Trump's legal team are going to have to work out a date. No date has yet been set, according to a court official I spoke with moments ago. And I'm just off the phone with Trump's lawyers, who say they will fight what they called a political prosecution. David, the security is going to be increased here in court and all over the city in preparation for potential protests, which Trump has called for. I'm told every member of the NYPD has been told to report in uniform at 7 a.m. tomorrow. David?
And Aaron, once the former president is brought to New York, it's still unclear what we'll actually see of the president.
We may not see much of him. Whether there are cameras in open court is going to be up to the judge in real time. He is going to be processed, fingerprinted potentially, and maybe even photographed. But whether we see much of him in a courtroom, we're not sure. If the former president has his way, though, David, he may want all of this to unfold in public.
All of this, of course, unprecedented. Aaron Katersky leading us off tonight. Former President Donald Trump will now have to come here to New York, as we were discussing, to face these charges. So let's bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, live in Washington. John, of course, we've never seen anything like this before. Former president now indicted. Donald Trump facing federal investigations in addition to this, involving the classified documents January 6th. He may face state charges in Georgia for allegedly interfering with the election there, pressuring authorities to find the votes after Joe Biden won that state narrowly. But speak to the history made here today, something that this country has really never witnessed.
David, we are truly in uncharted territory. It is not just that this is the first president or former president to be indicted to face criminal charges, but it is also somebody who is currently the leading candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. So this criminal proceeding will be playing out against the backdrop of an active presidential campaign. And Trump has made it perfectly clear that he would not be deterred from running if he were indicted. And David, as you alluded to, there are multiple other criminal investigations, the two federal investigations, one regarding January 6th, one regarding classified documents, both dealing with charges that are potentially significantly more serious than what he is facing in Manhattan.
John Carl with us tonight as well. John, thank you. Now to the former president's reaction tonight. The former president talking with our reporter just a short time ago. I want to bring in our executive editorial producer, John Santucci, who, of course, covered the former president for years for us, the campaign and his presidency. And you talked to him just moments ago.
Hi, David. I spoke to him a few moments ago. Sounded relaxed on the phone, said to me, this is an attack on our country. He called it political persecution. And David, as John Carl said, he is an active candidate. Donald Trump tells me they are trying to impact an election.
No indication he's going to stop now. In fact, he will use this as part of his campaign. He's indicated that already. In the meantime, you've also learned that the Trump team has been in contact, at least initial contact with the Secret Service.
Described to me as preliminary conversations with the Secret Service, David, for two reasons. One, security around Mar-a-Lago, and as Aaron Katersky said, that process of getting the former president to New York.
All right, John Santucci with us tonight. John, thank you for that. In the meantime, I want to bring in our legal analyst tonight, Professor Kate Shaw, who is with us for all of these cases. This one in particular, though, unprecedented. And Kate, I was talking to you earlier, the prosecutors potentially looking at state charges here of falsifying records in relation to this hush money payment. But here's the question for you. If they try to connect this on a state level to violating federal election laws, this would be untested, not an easy prosecution.
That's right, David. I think this could be a novel legal theory, although I hasten to say we have yet to see the indictment, so we're not sure what's in it. But we're pretty sure that at the heart of this charge is filing false business records with an intent to defraud. That's a misdemeanor, a state charge that's typically a misdemeanor, but that can become a felony if it's done in furtherance of another crime. So the question becomes, what might that other crime be? And if it's a federal campaign finance crime, that is pretty novel legal terrain. It's also possible that there's another crime in the vein of a state tax crime that the false records charge is going to be tied to, making it into a felony. So that, I think, would be less novel and untested, more traditional state criminal prosecution. But of course, we have yet to see the indictment to really evaluate it.
And with just moments left, Kate, we could see this in days, the charges?
I think very likely within days, David.
All right. Kate Shaw tonight, John Santucci, John Carl, Aaron Katersky. Our thanks to the entire team. We'll continue to stay on this as it develops throughout the evening. Much more later tonight on Nightline and in the morning, of course, on GMA. In the meantime, to the other news this Thursday evening, the devastating crash of 2 Army helicopters in Kentucky, killing all 9 soldiers on board. And what we're learning tonight from an eyewitness. Here's ABC's Martha Raddatz now.
2 Blackhawks down, 9 soldiers dead. The 2 helicopters from the 101st Airborne Division were on what was called a routine training mission. But routine military training is inherently dangerous, especially at night. All of the pilots and crew on this mission, 5 soldiers in one helicopter, 4 in the other, were wearing night vision goggles, which makes it more difficult to see, especially peripherally, as they crossed over the Kentucky woods near a residential area just before 10 p.m.
We heard a loud boom, and just all of a sudden the engines quit, and everything was quiet. Both of them had crashed.
The debris was spread over a wide area. The Army cannot confirm yet whether the 2 collided, but that is likely what investigators will look at first.
Helicopters have big whirling blades that are like knives, and when they cut into another helicopter, it always ends in tragedy.
All 9 soldiers were based at Fort Campbell. Teams were immediately dispatched to inform the families, and an aircraft safety team has been sent to the crash site to investigate. It is unlikely weather had anything to do with this. It was 58 degrees, fair skies, and clear visibility. David?
All right, Martha Raddatz, just a horrific story. Martha, thank you. We turn now to Russia tonight, arresting a Wall Street Journal reporter originally from New Jersey and accusing him tonight of being a spy, saying they caught him, quote, red-handed. He faces up to 20 years behind bars if convicted. Tonight, the White House calling the charge ridiculous. Here's ABC's James Longman.
Tonight, for the first time since the Cold War, an American journalist has been detained in Russia. He's been accused of trying to obtain classified information for the US government. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich seen being escorted from a Russian court today after pleading not guilty to an espionage charge. Tonight, the White House calls the allegation ridiculous.
The targeting of American citizens by Russian government is unacceptable. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich in the strongest terms.
Russia's intelligence agency, the FSB, arrested Gershkovich in Yekaterinburg, central Russia, on Wednesday. Officials claim he was caught red-handed collecting state secrets for the US on Russia's military-industrial complex. But this man, who says he was interviewed by Gershkovich not long before that arrest, says the reporter was looking into stories relating to Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Putin ally and founder of the Wagner mercenary group, currently fighting in Ukraine. In a statement tonight, the Wall Street Journal says it vehemently denies the allegations from the FSB and seeks the immediate release of our trusted and dedicated reporter. We stand in solidarity with Evan and his family. Gershkovich, a 31-year-old New Jersey native, has been working for the Journal for more than a year, but he's been a reporter in Russia since 2017.
And David, US officials say they have not yet been able to speak to Evan. If convicted, he could spend 20 years in prison. He'll next appear in court May 29. David?
All right, James Longman reporting tonight. James, thank you. Back here in the U.S., and for the first time, we are hearing the 911 calls from inside that Nashville school, including from a teacher huddling with students in the closet of the art room. ABC's Elwyn Lopez in Nashville.
Tonight, new chilling 911 calls revealed the desperation inside Covenant School as gunshots sounded.
Sounds like somebody's shooting guns.
Okay, you're still hearing shot. You're still hearing shots.
No, it sounds like they stopped at the moment.
Okay. And what?
The caller, a teaching assistant, whispering she's in the art room closet, trying to comfort and quiet the children with her. You can hear their little voices. One child asking. The alarm blaring in the background. Father Sandy Herman's 2 grandchildren are students at Covenant School. His grandson in that art room, hiding in the closet.
The art teacher gathered them up, and she had them go into the art supply room, and so that his classmates were in there with him.
Then his teacher called 911.
And David, the funeral for the pastor's daughter, Holly Scruggs, will be held at the damaged Covenant Church. Her classmates, Evelyn Dickhouse, will be buried tomorrow. David?
All right, Elwyn Lopez in Nashville for us. Elwyn, thank you. We are also, of course, watching the track of these potentially dangerous storm systems tonight. More than 70 million Americans on alert for dangerous storms from the Canadian border all the way down south to the Gulf of Mexico. The real threat of long-track tornadoes yet again, and in those same southern states, hit with those deadly tornadoes just days ago. Senior meteorologist Rob Marciano, you and I both traveled to that storm zone, and to think that these families are facing this all over again, Rob.
Yeah, David, and this is such a big area that's going to be impacted. So let's get right to it. Also includes a blizzard warning across parts of the upper Midwest near Cedar Rapids. That's where you're going to see the low. So damaging winds and tornadoes possible there. Then down the Mississippi towards Memphis, strong long track potentially tornadoes there going across the Tennessee Valley. Chicago, you get hit a couple of times with some storms. These push up the Ohio over the Appalachians and eventually into the Northeast come Saturday morning with rain and wind here. David?
Rob Marciano with us again tonight here. Thank you, Rob. We're going to turn now to the fiery train derailment in Minnesota. Families forced to flee their homes in the middle of the night. 22 cars derailing, many on their side, some carrying ethanol, catching fire. Fortunately, no one was injured. The governor and officials from the rail company on the scene by this morning, and tonight they say there's no threat of toxic exposure or any more explosions. That evacuation lifted. Of course, it comes amid a number of train derailments here in the U.S. as of late. When we come back here tonight, there is breaking news in this trial over the ski crash involving actress Gwyneth Paltrow. The verdict is just in from the jury tonight. We'll have that in a moment. Well, just in tonight, jurors finding Gwyneth Paltrow not at fault in the trial over that ski crash in Utah. Jurors deliberating for about 2.5 hours late today after both sides delivered closing arguments. Retired optometrist Terry Sanderson suing the actress after he and Paltrow collided at a resort in 2016. She countersued for $1. He was found 100% at fault. Will have to pay that $1 plus Gwyneth Paltrow's lawyer's fees. To the index of other news and the incredible rescue in Washington State. Take a look. Skier Francis Zuber on a run, catching a glimpse of Ian Steger's snowboard. Steger had been buried upside down for more than 5 minutes in the snow. Look at this. Zuber digging him out and saving his life. Just incredible. And fans packing stadiums today for baseball's opening day in the U.S. for the first time since 1968. All 30 teams playing their first games on the same day. The Yankees beating the Giants 5-0. The defending world champions, the Astros, they play tonight in Houston. So many other teams, too. Finally tonight here, the power of friendship. 2 best friends, 81 years old, around the world in 80 days. America strong.
Day in Ukraine, where Russian forces have made advances in the eastern frontline city of Bakhmut. According to the Ukrainian military, their fighters were still holding on in a months-long battle in which both sides have suffered heavy casualties. Bakhmut and the surrounding area have been the focal point of assault for much of the now more than 1 year long war. Well, for more, we're joined now by Alyona Hilevko, who's a political consultant and former local member of parliament in Ukraine. Alyona, good afternoon. Thanks for being with us. Bring us up to speed with the latest. And how significant, in your view, are these reported advances that have been made by the Russian forces?
Good afternoon, Tom. The advances made by the Russian forces come of no surprise because the counter-offensive that was meant to happen, that was meant to start this spring, has never really commenced. Those advances on Ukrainian side have been really slow and almost immovable. As a matter of fact, Ukraine has been on the defensive for the whole 3 months, almost 3 months of the first year, because we were expecting an influx of Western weapons. We were expecting tanks to come in sooner, all the artillery, ammunition, mid and long-range missiles that are coming into the country, but much, much slower than we wanted them.
Well, yes, I was going to ask you about this. Presumably the key factor, or one of the key factors, is this additional military assistance from other nations. Is there a sense that in Kiev and amongst tactical military command, they're playing a waiting game because they just need these resources before they can meaningfully even plan a counteroffensive, far less actually begin to implement it?
Well, the resources are extremely scarce, obviously, in Kiev, and everything's being treated quite carefully and with great caution, with great economy on those resources, because we have this enormous number of people coming from Russia, all the conscripts, the Wagner mercenaries, the convicts that just keep coming in human waves. And Ukrainians are barely coping with the number of ammunition and weapons that they have. My brother, in fact, was even telling me yesterday that the way they did trainings on javelins, for example, the anti-tank weapons that they got, they weren't even allowed to use the real missiles during the training. So they had to get the theory not to waste the very valuable supply. And of course, we understand that getting those ammunition and sending to Ukraine, first of all, it exhausts the supplies from the West, their own supplies. It maybe somewhat undermines their own security. But we have to understand that that process needs to be facilitated much quicker, because every day of sending this military aid to Ukraine translates into lives lost on the front line.
So what needs to happen next, Alyona, in your view, to see a meaningful shift in terms of this counter-offensive? It's in planning, it's strategically, it's being discussed in Kiev and I guess on the front lines. But are we waiting for a singular moment that could galvanise that resistance, or is it one of these moments where you just have to sort of expect that maybe Bakhmut falls and it's part of the ebb and flow, the ongoing constant shift of dynamic on the front lines?
Unfortunately, Tom, it's not just about Bakhmut at this point. Yes, they've gained some ground there, but they've been incrementally gaining grounds on the whole of the front line of Ukraine, which is an extremely long front line, over 1,000 kilometers. That's very difficult to hold. They're gaining ground in Bakhmut. It's 100 meters a day, but that still grows and adds up. They've almost fully destroyed Avdiivka. There's nothing left of it. We certainly know that the Russians are relocating their sources from Bakhmut, because I think they've somewhat exhausted the human resource, somewhat changing the strategy a little bit, and are trying to go back into the northeast, which is around the liberated Liman and Izum, the little towns near Kharkiv region that were liberated last summer. So they're fully going against the eastern flank, whereas Ukraine had some success in the southeast, in Zaporizhia region, but that was very, very small. So effectively, we do need, for all of this support that's been corroborated, that's been advocated for in the last few months, all the meetings of Rothstein, of JEF groups, all the NATO members and non-NATO members who are deciding to give military aid to Ukraine. We just need that aid to come in sooner. I mean, Ukraine have just received the Challenger tanks from the UK with the crew that was trained here in the UK. We're starting to receive Leopards from Germany, and hopefully some other ammunition will come. Obviously, Abrams tanks from the US are scheduled for next year, but they're not that essential. We do need ammunition. We need mid-range and long-range missiles. That is crucial. And of course, we need fighter jets.
I wanted to ask you, Elena, whilst we were in conversation about President Zelensky, the remarks he made yesterday. Obviously, he invited President Xi to come to Ukraine. I don't know whether this was sort of slightly playful, almost antagonistic. We know that Xi is obviously a committed ally of Russia, and yet Xi has been attempting to position or to reposition China as a potential broker, a mediator almost, as ridiculous as that may seem. What did you make of Zelensky's remarks? And do you think it's, I don't know, vainglorious to think that a meeting could actually happen?
There was meant to be a call that was meant to happen after Xi's meeting with Putin, a call with President Zelensky, which never happened. So I believe that was Zelensky's nudge towards China that, they also need to come talk to Ukraine if they're really aiming to be this mediator. Realistically, though, I think China is in a position of not really being interested in Russia's victory. They just want all the resources that Russia has now been left with due to the seizure of any relationship with the West to come towards China, cheap energy supply, human resources, infrastructure, etc. So China is really pursuing their own interests. And all President Zelensky is saying that, look, if you want to be a party to this war, if you're really engaging, then be brave, come face us, hear what we have to say, and let's have this dialogue.
Aliona, always great to hear from you. Thanks for your time today. That was Aliona Clifko joining us here on The Briefing. 8 minutes past midday. Let's cross over to Monocle's Carlotta Rebello. She's standing by with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Tom. 2 U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopters have crashed during a routine training mission over Kentucky. The state's governor said fatalities were expected and that the status of the crew members was not yet known. Russia's top security agency has said a reporter for the Wall Street Journal has been arrested on espionage charges. The Federal Security Service said that Ivan Gerkovshchik has been detained in the Ural Mountains while allegedly trying to obtain classified information. The journalist could face up to 20 years in prison if convicted of espionage. And Italy's right-wing government has backed a bill that would ban laboratory-produced meat and other synthetic foods, highlighting the need to protect Italian food heritage and health. If the proposals go through, breaking the ban would attract fines of up to €60,000. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Carlotta. To Australia next, where lawmakers have passed landmark new laws to cap greenhouse gas emissions and to make the nation's biggest polluters pay for carbon credits. Well, let's get more on this now with Karen Middleton, who's the Saturday Paper's chief political correspondent in Canberra. Good evening to you there, Karen. Thanks for joining us as ever. Just start by reminding us exactly what's been passed into law.
Well, it's called the Safeguards Mechanism, and in fact, it's a mechanism that existed prior to this week, but the significant thing is a deal between the federal government and the Greens party here to give it a bit more teeth. And the way it works is that it affects the 215 biggest polluting companies in Australia. So coal and gas, companies that make cement, smelters, manufacturers and the like. And it's going to force them to reduce their emissions by putting a cap, a hard cap, it's being described as, on the overall emissions that these companies can produce. And they are going to be forced to either decarbonise their processes or buy carbon credits to keep the emissions down. But previously, the limit was on the net emissions, so they could effectively buy carbon credits to get themselves out of jail, metaphorically speaking, completely. And now there's going to be a hard cap. They will be forced one way or another to reduce.
And Karen, it's interesting, this is sort of termed the climate wars, this ongoing battle. And I guess, depending on where you stand in that battle, how's this been received, or does it very much depend on who you ask?
Well, I think we have a much more general view in the community now that something has to be done about climate change. It's been a tortured debate in this country for the last 15 years, really, and we've seen stopping and starting on policy to try and tackle the problem of emissions and greenhouse gases. And we've seen a carbon trading system, an attempt to introduce one back in 2009 that the Greens effectively stymied. Then we saw them agree to a Labor government proposition in 2012 to introduce a carbon trading scheme. But when a coalition of Conservative parties got into government in 2013, they abolished it. So finally, we have seen steps, something put into law that is going to see a downward trajectory on emissions. Not enough, but a start. And so I think people are seeing it as quite a momentous thing.
Momentous, maybe, but as you said, time will be the true judge. And in the context of the broader commitment by Australia, which is to reach net zero by 2050, I think that is still the target. I mean, is that an achievable goal? What we see in so many markets is that the sort of the end date, the red line, constantly gets kicked back and back and back. What's the view in terms of how achievable the current set of goals actually is in the longer term?
Well, very mixed, because they have a more interim goal than that the government does, of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 43% on 2005 levels by 2030. So we haven't got long to get to that. And there certainly seems to be a strong view that what's being done with this change to the law is not going to be enough to reach that goal. And it's also not going to be enough to reach the international targets of getting, getting greenhouse gases down far enough to stop irreversible, dangerous global warming. So while it's a good start, they are going to have to work very hard on greater take-up of renewable energy and replacing other emitting companies and the like in the economy to really meet those targets.
Well, let's talk about some of the sort of the bad guys, if you like. I use the term under advisement, coal, gas, oil, very heavy industries, lots of extracting mineral production, the big polluters. What does this mean realistically? Because, as you say, there's a feeling that despite the war of words, consequential change was always coming. It was more about the pace and how codified and formalised the demands would be. Do you think this is a critical moment of change, Karen, in terms of what the biggest polluters are going to have to do actually now in the shorter term?
Yes, I do think it is. And the big argument, of course, has been about the fossil fuel industry. And in fact, what the Greens Party, which is in a sort of pivotal position in the Senate here now, wanted was they wanted the government to agree to no new coal and gas mining at all, no new projects. Now, the government wouldn't agree to that, but there was a negotiation. And what they've come up with is this hard cap, the argument being that the impact of that will be that it will be much more difficult to open up new coal and gas mines, and there will be a requirement that they start at net zero emissions. So even if new endeavours open up, they're going to have to start out by buying credits enough or taking steps very rapidly to ensure that they can say they have net zero emissions from the very beginning. And that is generally seen as, while not banning projects outright from starting up, making it much more difficult to enter the market and putting sort of more onerous conditions on them that will see their emissions reduced. So I think it is a significant step, albeit not as big a one as the Greens might have liked.
Yeah, an important day nevertheless. Thanks for making sense of it for us, Karen. That was Karen Middleton joining us from Canberra here on The Briefing on Monocle 24.